Good morning and welcome to the Last Night's Game podcast. I'm your host, Amy Butchon-Siegfried, and delighted to be here today to talk with you about athletics and drugs. And where did this whole topic come from? Well, I was multiple reasons. I was listening to a story on the news one day, and they were talking about how half the country is now legalized marijuana in some shape or form. And it started getting me thinking as I saw these ads for the Olympics in a year in different sports, how that is impacting the world of sports. And to join me to talk about this really interesting topic is my co-host, my favorite brother, my co-founder of Last Night's Game, Scott. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me to talk about what maybe just a few years ago would have been a very controversial podcast discussing marijuana and drugs in sports. And just the past few years, we've seen that the mindset shift completely almost to the use of it in sports. So, and a lot of people ask questions about it, what's legal, what's not legal for athletes. So it's interesting to talk about.
Yes. And let's be honest, if you are using us as a legal platform, consult with your agent, your legal team, whatever that might be. Okay, we've done our research, but we are also not your marijuana attorneys. So with that being said, I kind of start off with leagues are rethinking their stances on this. Mm-hmm. We've kind of overall as a broad spectrum, leagues have lightened the penalties. They have raised the level of THC in a drug test. That means obviously a threshold where players can have some of that in their system. What's the overall reason? Talk to me a little bit about the reasoning behind this change in the dynamics. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with legalizing it, but what does it have to do with in the whole round of sports?
I mean, obviously legalizing it in, I think it's like 24 states, it's legalized for recreational uses. That does help. It helped push this along a lot faster. But the main reason is athletes' health. So instead of using things like really strong opioids and things that can become addictive and lead to, athletes losing their careers and their lives to these pills, the leagues really realize that there's beneficial purposes to marijuana use and other things other than opioids. And that was really the big push because we started to see what opioids have done to a lot of former athletes.
Right. You think about, let's just think the obvious one is Brett Favre. Mm-hmm. All right. Longtime quarterback in the NFL, played for the Vikings, played for the Packers. He had an addiction to painkillers after surgery.
Yeah. And he was notorious for never missing a game, never missing a play. And, that comes at a cost to your body. And we've seen what it's done to him. And he's obviously not the only one. There's hundreds of athletes that have gone down that road because it was available. It was easy to get for them as athletes from their teams. So this is a major shift, and hopefully that's going to move forward. It's going to be beneficial later in life for these guys.
Yeah, it's really interesting as we dove into the research on different leagues and who's doing what, and everyone's just a little bit different. There was a quote from Kevin Durant, who is known to, cannabis is really his jam. He basically said that the drug is so commonly used in the league, it's like wine at this point. I thought that was a really interesting perspective, right? Because if you're being successful and this is one of your ways of managing pain, your teammates are going to catch on, right? That's just how anything works, right? If I'm having luck with eating lots of kale and, dropping my cholesterol and my weight, we might all start eating kale because I might tell everybody around me about it. It's no different in that sense that you're watching the performance increase in professional sports, especially like we look at a football and some of these, they're really all very tough on your body, no matter what it is. And so being able to manage that pain and play at a high level where you're not being shot up with all kinds of different other things to manage it would catch like wildfire.
Yeah. And that quote from Kevin is funny because it was a quote about him meeting with the commissioner, smelling like marijuana to get marijuana, the threshold raised. So that's where that quote came from. He was definitely on the forefront for the NBA.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting. And the NBA itself does not test for cannabis anymore.
No, they do not.
So they're one of the leagues. It looks like baseball still treats it kind of like, they said it like alcohol use, essentially. Like if you were misusing alcohol, just like if you were misusing marijuana, they would provide you with options for care, if you will. And so this is how they're treating it in baseball. And it's interesting that they added opioids to the list, with the banned substance list, when they took off cannabis-derived compounds.
And there was a big portion of MLB baseball that was using opioids, abusing it. And there was even maybe just a few years ago, a pitcher overdosed, unfortunately, while the team was on the road. So I think that, while tragic, helped speed up MLB's changes.
That's right. It was an Angels player, and I'm blanking on his name right now.
Yes. Yeah, he was on the road, and unfortunately, he overdosed on it. So that was definitely a catalyst to help move forward.
Yeah, and it's incredible because there are, this is like anything, right? We're talking like name, image, likeness, all that. Like there were people who lost their careers because of taking money in college,
yes,
which now is legal, right? We're looking at you, Reggie Bush, losing your Heisman, all these other things. Same could be said for weed, for marijuana, because people were losing their careers. I mean, Travis Kelce almost didn't even make it to the NFL because of it. And what a tragic story that would be. We wouldn't have anyone for Taylor Swift to love if he wasn't in the NFL. But you think about the players who have nearly or have lost their careers because of this.
And 2010 bowl game for Cincinnati and New Orleans, Travis tests positive before the game and maybe had a little too much fun on Bourbon Street and had his brother not talk to the coach and got him back on the team. Who knows where we'd be as far as that love story goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. And from what I can tell from our research is essentially no league allows you to sell it, distribute it. Some of them actually don't allow you to possess it, which I thought that was kind of interesting. So maybe that's like not walking into a facility with it. Kind of like being in the Vegas airport where it has a deposit trash can on the way out of Vegas. Like when you go in to go check your bag, it's like, put your stuff here. This is, an amnesty box, essentially.
And a lot of these guys, they're traveling so much from state to state, and not every state's got the same rules. So in the event that something could happen getting off the plane, that they don't want it to be on their team flight or anything like that.
Right. Well, look at like Brittany Griner, right? The WNBA doesn't test for any sort of cannabis product. And I mean, look what happened to her, right? She was not obviously playing in a WNBA game and was obviously in a different country.
Yes.
And that being Russia. But you look at how, you really have to, if that's how you maintain your game, you really do have to be mindful of that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, let's talk. I want to go a little, make a little right-hand turn, a little chicane, if you will.
Okay.
Aaron Rodgers. Everyone makes fun of Aaron Rodgers for being sort of out there with some of the stuff that he's into. Now, if this was Aaron Rodgers 30 years ago, this whole, even if he's talked about marijuana, people would think he was out there, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's really interesting to see, will the stuff that he's into, maybe not the 4-day darkness retreat, but I mean, he's talked about the use of psychedelics to, and I quote, alleviate his fear of death and deepening a sense of self-love.
It's a bit extreme, but yes. So he could be on the forefront of this as well. Maybe get to the point where you don't have to go to a jungle in Costa Rica to do it, if it's got all these benefits. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see, is he this groundbreaking quarterback who at this point, if I recall, does not have a job. So that'll be interesting to flush that out as well.
Yeah, he's technically under contract, but he doesn't necessarily have a job yet. We'll see who wants to take a chance on him. He is 40, and if these things are reversing aging for him and helping his brain, somebody will give him a chance.
Yep. And if he is, call me. I'd like to also make my brain a little bit younger, a little more spry. But I don't have 4 days to sit in the dark, and I don't like the dark that much.
Plus, he's got a $50 million contract to fulfill next season if he wants.
Yeah.
So that's a good incentive to go.
Yeah, I don't have one of those either. So
not yet.
Flat out of the $50 million contracts for now.
Yes.
Maybe one day someone will offer me one, but probably not for my athletic abilities.
For now, yes.
For now. We should say Olympics. Mm-hmm. This is still illegal in the Olympics, regardless of who, what, when, where, why. It is completely the World Anti-Doping Agency. This applies to all athletes all across the world, that this is not an opportunity.
They have not lessened their stance on this whatsoever, even though I think it's being led by the United States to, maybe raise the threshold, allow for it, or don't test for it at all. And we saw Sha'Carri Richardson lost her chance at the Olympics.
That's right.
2 Olympics ago now at this point, because she did have some in her system, which, she did own. She came back, and then she, had a great resurgence at this Olympics. So she, you know, even though it is legal here in this country, she owned it and made for an epic comeback.
Sure did. But
And
I mean, that was,
I don't know if we'll ever see it change because of other countries' stances, but
yeah.
maybe a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it would be challenging, right? You're trying to create an equal playing field as best as you can across the world. And that's really hard to do with something that, is not open. Other countries are not open to that.
Russia, as we know,
Yeah,
with
there's
Brittany
that.
Griner. So
Yeah.
they're certainly not advocating for it.
Yeah, but I mean, it's really interesting though, because remember when we've done all this research on the Tour de France, it once upon a time, alcohol was banned because it was a stimulant. So people were biking and then hitting the bar and grabbing a beer or a shot and then getting back on their bikes. And now we obviously know that I mean, we could call it a stimulant, but it's probably not the best choice for your body maybe a beer would be okay because you've got the hops and all those things. But
Yeah.
going on a shot of whiskey or scotch and then hopping back on your bike and going for it isn't really the best use of your performance, obviously.
No, but look, they banned that, and then look at all the drugs they allowed to come in.
That's true.
And widely known it was all happening, and no one did anything about it for forever until Lance Armstrong.
Yeah.
Until they hated him so much because he was winning, they decided that was going to be bad.
That's right. He was
EPO and all other things that they're doing.
Yeah, I guess talk us through a little bit. I guess he just got too good, right? Talk us through like
Barry
the
Bonds.
Right. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
He got too good at being on steroids.
I'm sure Patrick Mahomes gets tested often. And who was it? I'm trying to remember which player it was this season who had a phenomenal football game. And I can't remember who it was for the life of me. And immediately just happened to have a random drug test after that game.
I think it was a punter, actually, because I think he had I don't know if he had a fake punt or he nailed like an 80-yard punt. And obviously that's, very dangerous for people. So, I mean, typically in the NFL, you only have to pass a test going into training camp. So in a way, it was more like a stupidity test.
Got it.
If you it's coming. So in the past, I think players just talked about they just quit for like a month or so, and it would be out of their system, knowing that test was coming. So it was more of like a IQ test.
Yep. Well, it's like when I worked at the Hard Rock Cafe, they drug tested you in the beginning, and then they never drug tested you again because 90% of the people in that restaurant, I'm not saying now, but then allegedly were engaging in other conduct.
Yeah.
The rest of us just had cocktails. Yeah.
That's just like the league's looking the other way. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, so talk to us a little bit about. So we're talking about cannabis products. We'll just call it marijuana in general. But what's the difference between that and then we're looking at performance enhancing drugs or PEDs? Can you give us a little disconnect or connection on what the difference of those two are?
I think that obviously can be performance enhancing for some people, which some athletes do it before games. A lot of NBA players do it, and they'll tell you that. But it does also have medical benefits. It is natural. It comes from the earth. As to where the performance enhancers that we're speaking about are, steroids, HGH, EPO, which is blood doping, which is like a lot of the cyclists did. So those are more focused on recovery and building your muscles up and making you stronger than you should be naturally. And obviously those are not coming from the earth.
Got it. Well, it's interesting though. It just spurred my thought of, if medical or recreational marijuana is not available in all the states, then players who, I mean, granted they play in a lot of states, but like players who are home based in a state where it's not legal are at a disadvantage. So if we're looking at it being like on the level of the Olympics, right? Where we said, hey, not everybody can have access to that. So it's not fair, essentially. Then wouldn't one argue that being based in a state where it's not recreational could be a hindrance to some of those athletes and therefore not creating a level playing field?
I'm sure it has played a factor in people's decisions to sign certain places. And they probably won't come out and say it, but I'm sure that has played into decisions on where they're going to go and sign a contract, knowing that they can do it legally and they won't get in trouble or arrested or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Well, and there's we were talking about stuff that was legal slash maybe not so legal. Was reading a story. There's quite a few interesting stories about athletes who have taken matters in their own hands. Derek Wolfe comes to mind as a story that I was like, wow, this is aggressive. He had an unusual pregame routine in his 9-year career. He played in the NFL. He would microdose mushrooms and Adderall, which then put him into like hyper-focused rage mode. And so the article proceeded to be like, this is not really a healthy choice. But I mean, this was way before any of that was legal, and clearly none of that was popping up on his drug tests.
No, and if you ever watched him play, mostly for the Broncos, he was an animal out there. And now you kind of know why.
Now you know why. He had laser focus of Adderall and a little microdose of mushrooms. And Jake Plummer, who used to play for the Cardinals, longtime quarterback, he is a huge mushroom guy. Like, he is the guy on the market who has been out pushing. He has a company dedicated to promoting the health benefits of legal non-psychedelic mushrooms. But I mean, he has really been an advocate for this. And I remember reading an article probably even like 8 or 10 years ago about him really trying to push this, and was also a proponent for marijuana in the NFL for just pain management, because he was so beat up that this was his only option.
Yeah, and we should say that they're not psychedelic mushrooms by any means. And I've tried it, and I think I gave you one of his tinctures before.
Oh, that's right. It's like it's lion's mane and some of that stuff. Yep.
It's mostly like Focus and Nature's Adderall.
Nature's Adderall. Use that.
And he's doing very well as far as being relaxed and focused. If you've heard Mr. Plummer talk recently, so he's walking billboard for it.
Now we have quite a few athletes. Now, from what like I said, our research, I had not read all the CBAs, but most leagues are not allowing their players to be sponsored by the teams, to be sponsored by any sort of marijuana company, except the NWSL, National Women's Soccer League. They are allowing that. But there are quite a few athletes, which I believe are all retired, that have dove into the business itself.
Yeah, I think one of the more famous ones that we kind of spoke about has to be Mike Tyson, right? He credits that with a lot of his post-fight career success and just becoming like a normal person.
Right. Well, Mike Tyson 2.0. Actually, one of my students did a paper on Mike Tyson 2.0 and talking about his brand and how he makes edibles in the shape of Evander Holyfield's ear that he bit. I mean, if that's not something that makes you want to dive in and at least visit Mike Tyson 2.0, I don't know what is, but that was his big credit for the Jake Paul fight, right?
Yes, I'd love to see the stats on the sales of those edible ears, like during the fight or leading up to it, with people trying to harness that power.
I mean, it's an incredible. Hey, you know what? You might as well embrace it. And we have Carmelo Anthony he's a nominee for the NBA Hall of Fame. We have, my favorite might be Marshawn Lynch, who is a retired running back. He has his own cannabis company, great name, Ganjapreneur.
There you go.
So can't forget that one.
That's got to be trademarked.
It's got to be. I mean, why not? What, with all this said and done, like, what's the silver lining of this when it's all said and done?
And I think that, it took so many years to realize how bad opiates were for these players and what they were doing to their bodies and their brains. And these leagues are actually on the forefront of, allowing legalized marijuana to treat injuries, to treat, recovery. And I think we'll see the benefits maybe 10, 20 years from now when these guys are retired, 50, 60 years old, and their bodies aren't as beat up. They're not getting arrested. They're not going to rehabs. They're not crippled from this. So I think a lot of these leagues, I think baseball is actually the first one, weirdly, to do away with it. For them to see the data and see what states were doing as far as legalized this stuff goes, that it's going to pay off in the long run for most of these guys.
Yep, I hope so. Is there last things you want to leave us with this topic before we sign off?
I think we just dove into all of it. I think it's a very interesting topic. It's funny how, 5 years ago, we never would have been able to have this conversation.
No. We did a podcast probably 3 years ago about all the people arrested.
Yes.
Some of those were drug rings. That's a whole different story. But how we would have been talking about people who lost their careers. And here we are, evolved all the way into the point where this is helping people in their careers, male and female athletes, as they go forward in trying to conquer and reach their dreams. I mean, it's pretty incredible.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining me today to talk about this. And we'll see you next Wednesday for another episode of Wednesday Wisdom on Last Night's Game.
Thank you.